I'm just going to hand over to him and let him run with it. So thank you very much, Shekhar.
All right, let's go. It starts out in blue, so let's keep it somewhere unexpected. So really what I'd like to do is hear from you and say, if you guys have questions and unexpected questions, we'll get unexpected answers, we'll get unexpected desires, and that'll lead to unexpected goals, that'll lead to unexpected achievements. So let's start. Yeah? Yes?
I wanted to ask you about your communications on Twitter and all the social media things that you're doing and building your brand. What is your main objective from that, or what are you getting from it?
I'm obsessed with social media. I think that I realize that we're storytellers, right? We're communicators, and we were born with this idea that you have to make it something that goes for 2 hours on the screen. We just did it because that's how the world was. And the world will keep telling us, see, there's an understanding in this world that creativity drives technology. Is completely the other way around. Technology drives creativity. If you didn't have a pencil, you wouldn't draw. If you didn't have a camera, you wouldn't take a picture. And as far as I can see, popcorn, the idea of buying and eating popcorn drives a 2-hour movie. It's not it's consumerism. So I want to see how the world will change and how we'll start to tell stories in different ways. And I realized that actually we could tell stories in manifold ways. And going back to an idea where when stories were originally told, they had no end. And the only time that ends came when, I suppose, the technology called the Gutenberg press came. So because everybody wanted to write a novel had to have an end, and therefore, wow, you see, a novel had to, thank you very much. A novel had to have an end, and therefore we have what we call a 3-act structure of drama. It came because it has to have an end. But stories never. I mean, Mahabharata was spoken. How could a story that's spoken and 1 million people are telling the story ever have an end, or they would all be different? And so social media, I realized, was probably take us back to no endings. Open-endedness. Open-endedness. Imagine that I can just, within a second, experiment with 200,000 people at the same time. Say something, see how they react, and say something else, and see what they like, see what they don't like. The form, the same idea told differently, effectively changes the very idea. Meaning and perception are two different things. I could say something in 140 letters, and it could mean the same thing, but shifted around, the word shifted around, the perception, because perception is far more emotional than meaning is. So perception completely changes, and that's a great way. I mean, so I'm doing what I think for newspapers, wherever it be done, they must be looking at it called the headline theory. You know, you're telling the same news, but the headline is different in different newspaper, each one trying to sell it. And Twitter is a great experiment to do that. So I believe the social media is going to take over our world in a way that we've never known before, because when we talk to people, we already assume we're talking to one person. And then, of course, there's word of mouth and people talk to each other. But by the time that one person's mind is made up, that one person has already, within a few seconds, communicated with thousands of others. And so the collective mind, the reactivity that we thought was individual is now becoming more and more collective. Is that good for when I haven't had coffee? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And what are you getting back from the people? What are you?
I'm understanding them. I'm understanding myself. I realize you can get addictive. It's pretty addictive to wake up in the morning in a hotel room not knowing anybody and say, well, what do you mean I don't know anybody? Hello everybody, 200,000 people are coming back. You know, it's a different world.
Don't feel lonely.
Can that experience be translated to moving image? Do you feel?
Oh, yeah. I think that, it's only text because of our technology, because bandwidth is small. I mean, and once we have, if you're not shy about how you look early in the morning, it'll be translated to video like that once you have the technology, both of the recording and perception and receiving, but mostly of the bandwidth. Right now, we keep saying this, but it'll take time. We keep saying you have to imagine broadband and bandwidth as electricity. You never say, I don't have enough electricity, right? Or so, can I have a bigger fridge? The question is never, can I, oh, actually don't have enough power. It doesn't. And bandwidth is going to be like that. So when that happens, it's going to be multifarious. It's going to be video. A lot of it will be video because it crosses language barriers. Yeah.
Yeah. As I know that you don't like to prepare yourself for your scenes before filming because it makes you more creative and free. My question is that a base and advice you give it to us, or it's just your way to make a movie?
Actually, that's not true. I think I say that for dramatic effect. The truth is that I prepare. I'm obsessive. In fact, I prepare too much. But it probably happens because I prepare too much that I try and throw myself into a sense of panic just before I shoot. Because when you prepare for something that has not yet happened. And when something happens, it has an organic nature to it that you could never have prepared for. Because how could you have prepared for the now? Because the now only exists now. You've always prepared for the anticipation of now. So all preparation is anticipatory. Did I get that right? Yes. All preparation is anticipatory, and when it actually happens, the organicness of it, the now of it, and the truth of it is that moment. And the fear in me is that if preparation is anticipatory, you are actually going to block out the now. You're going to block out the truth. You're going to block out the organic nature of creativity. And if you tend to block that out, then you probably will produce a piece of work that may be intellectually admired, even if you're clever enough, emotionally admired, but never last. Because the truth is of the now, the truth of the now encompasses so much of who we are that it becomes timeless. The now is pretty timeless. Anticipation is cleverness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to that point, so with Elizabeth, did you storyboard?
Yes. But here's what happened. It was funny. When I started to storyboard it, I became lesser creatively. So if you ever meet the guy, Temple is his name, he storyboards all the Bond films. So I started a game with him. I said, okay, if you can guess how I'm going to shoot the scene, I'm going to change it. So even then I was constantly experimenting with this. So he would storyboard it and I would say, oh shit, you know. So I would change it and then he would guess it and I would change it. And we both found that that game in itself was provocative and it was like peeling off the onion layers of everything because it made us wonder why, how, whether. So yearning and wonder. Wonder is an amazing thing. I mean, that's what we lose actually, unfortunately. You know, it's really, really difficult. It's one thing to hang on to as you get into professional and time scales and delivery patterns and things. Wonder. It's what all creativity is all about. It's all what life is all about. Just wonder, and children have it. And that's the one thing we should be fighting not to lose, is wonder. And so that's...
It's really interesting, that game, because that pushed you beyond the obvious each time.
And so pushed us over the edge into wondering why we're doing this. You know, the game constantly said, it is what is. It's, you know, some asking questions and knowing that the answer that you got is not necessarily the only answer, but it's an answer that you got after a lot of soul searching. You got an answer, but it's not the only one, because ultimately the day ends and you still got another question that the night came and didn't allow you to ask. You know, so yeah, that was good.
So, how did you make your transition to Hollywood, like after doing 2-3 Bollywood, a lot of Bollywood movies? So, what was the point of departure when you decided that you need to make on to Hollywood, or you need to make that transition?
Well, there are two ways to answer that. I mean, you're from India, right? Like, it happened because it's supposed to happen. I mean, that's an easy answer to everything. But then there's the narrative, which is the linearity of how it happened. The linearity of it is that I looked around myself at the best, the most applauded filmmakers of Bollywood at that time and said, it's not what I want to do. So I have to be working in a space that allows me a greater latitude of storytelling, a greater latitudes of ideas. So I went. And I sat there for about a year till my money ran out. It's a great thing. Going broke is an incredibly creative act. True. It's incredibly creative. Oh, you know that.
Yep.
You must do that all your life, you know. It's like, just let your bank account go to zero, don't know what's going to happen the next. You have no idea how creative you get. So I went to Hollywood and went to Los Angeles and got broke. And that's how I started. It took me, because I'm not very consumptive, so it didn't happen overnight. I didn't buy myself a Bentley or something like that. I just went there and sat in a hotel till I realized, oh shit. So that's how it happened. But I always, I guess, you know, you put your things out to the universe and the universe responds to you and gets impatient with you and said, oh no, this guy's getting on my nerves and there are so many other people I have to attend to. So I must have put that out in the universe long enough for something to happen for me to get there. There's a whole new different theory about that, but we could talk about that. But that's so embedded in the creative act that you'll find it yourself.
So when did you prepare yourself? Like, were there any things that you were preparing yourself for Hollywood? Because as we know, Bollywood is totally different than what Hollywood does. Or
No. It's the bus system, I call it. The bus system gets you to where you want. The bus system is different in Bombay than it's in Hollywood. The way the guy comes and asks you a ticket, you stand in a queue, don't stand in a queue. It's just the bus system. It's what gets you there. By the time you say action, it's like Zach. Sorry, Bob. You know, it's like how you get there is different. Once you say action, it's the same, right? And when you say cut, it's the same. In between action and cut, it's like the same thing. It's like, and if it's not the same thing, then you're not involved.
Shekhar, you talked about putting something out into the universe. Do you want to just expand on that? I mean, do you believe that? I
Yeah.
bet you do.
Oh, I completely believe that. I completely believe that we drive and are driven at the same time. So there is something that is happening. These are all mixed up. I mean, scientifically, these are all mixed up with the idea that in the theory of time has no linearity, right? So if I pick up this cup and I put it there, it assumes that I have power over the linearity of time and decision because I'm actually that action. But if you think that time is not linear, then the cup is there and here at the same time and there was no decision in it. Now once you start to try and comprehend that, and in the comprehension of that, so what is it that you're happening is nothing except your own imagination, right? And the more powerful your imagination, the more powerfully you will perceive what is happening. And because if time, the linearity of time is only a perception, then my going to Hollywood is only my perception, because it's already happened. And in a way, so is there a singularity about happening? No, it's a multiplicity of happenings, and everything is happening at the same time all over the world. So that is what, after all, when we use a word called eternity so easily, that ultimately is eternity. Eternity is nothing but the fact that everything that has happened, will not happen, may not happen, happened, will happen, everything is all in one moment. Right? And if it's all in one moment, what actually happened when I went to Hollywood? It's perception. It's your perception, it's my perception, it's collective perception. But then, we could be talking about that until sundown, and that'd be great. Yes.
If you have the power and the ability to make a change in the Indian film industry, Hollywood, that's the main things you want to change. And the same question for Hollywood.
Because everything changes all the time. So what you want to change changes all the time. So I want to change what's change that has not changed right now. It's certainly, we need to explore where else filmmaking could go. Filmmaking constantly, as all art does, becomes fashionable. And it becomes fashionable over that has succeeded either commercially or applauded by critics at a certain time. And when people find applause and financial reward, then they start to assume that there is achievement, and that achievement becomes what needs to be changed. That achievement becomes what we call the formula. But the formula changes every day because fashions change every day. But if you are to look for creativity, then creativity essentially lies in the decision to change the formula, but the formula changes all the time. So what you desire to change changes all the time too. And that's the very essence of storytelling. So if I tell you a story today, say, Acha, now tell me the story, I'm going to have to change it. Because how am I going to emotionally engage you if I tell you the same story? Even if it might be the same story, I have to tell it to you differently. So there is nothing that I need to change that is not already consistently changing. So I need to keep changing that which is already changing.
I mean, so in this case, you return to Bollywood because it's changed and you can find what you want.
Oh yeah, it's changed. I mean, I've been living in Mumbai for the last 2 years and I find it's really changed. And there's not a single filmmaker that I don't meet that I meet here. There are lots of Indian filmmakers here right now who are saying, oh, we've got to change this and we've got to change that. Effectively, we don't want to know what we want to change, but we want to make it better, all right? But better is a judgment, right? There's, it's very funny, there was, not that long ago, there was a film called Pakiza. Tell you how things change, in which Meena Kumar, anyway, the leading lady was one of the biggest leading ladies at that time. And there were gasps in the audience because she lifted her skirt and showed her ankle. How could a leading lady do that? Today, all the leading ladies of Bollywood can't get in till they have figures and they all wear bikinis and they have great bodies. So it changed, right? So everything is changing. It's constantly changing. There are no gasps. There are gasps if she doesn't. Nobody goes to see the film. You know, so what do I change? For me, fundamentally, I like issue-based films. I like films about issues, tell stories that will talk about things that you want to change in society, and so that's where I'd like to go. But that's no reason for every filmmaker to do that. Yeah. It's a tough question. You're absolutely right. It's like, yeah, obviously, if I'm directing a film based on a huge battle and people are seeing it on a big screen, there's a lot more detail that's going to get picked up. But if I'm directing a film that you're going to see on your iPhone, it would worry me. But we compensate, you know. The imagination is fantastic. I would need to direct it differently and ask you to imagine scale. You don't have to show scale. And if you notice, one of the great technologies that's gone unnoticed is the quality of sound in mobile phones. You know, so I'm constantly compensating with sound. People are compensating with sound. So the sound provokes so the thunder of 500 horses galloping with people with going into battle, for example, can be provoked in your imagination by the sound, even if you don't pick up the detail on film, on the visual. So there are a lot of tools, and actually the largest tool is not even sound and picture. It is the provocation of the poet as against the provocation of prose. The poet will not say a few words. It's what the poet didn't find, but provoked in your mind those words that were not actually in the poetry, which is why poetry works, right? And any audiovisual works best consistently because of that which it doesn't give you, but provokes in your imagination, and you start to think it exists. But actually, when you go back to the audio-visual, you realize actually it's not that. It was provoked in my mind, and that's essentially what storytelling is all about. So you find ways to turn through the provocation of the way you tell your story. So I come back to the question on Twitter, which is I can take the same idea and tell it in a way that it provokes a different idea and a different visual in somebody else's mind, and that's why it's such a great way to experiment. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? That's where stories become very important. When you tell a good story, it's like a great poet who is provoking, or a composer that is provoking those notes in your imagination that actually don't exist in the composition. They never do. But it makes value for you because you're imagining them in the way he's structured the notes to go up and then suddenly drop and go back, and you're still left. For that one little moment, you're still left imagining, and that imagining, that's where actually fundamental creativity lies, in your imagining, not in the creation of not in what's written or shot or heard with the instruments.
On that point, can I ask you your relationship with technology and how is that influencing the way you work?
It's what I work with. You give a child color pencil, you're giving them technology. You give them crayons, you give them technology. Just watch it. One day, give a 5-year-old child color pencils and crayons, and you'll find that they draw differently. It's such a minor change. You know, a color pencil that needs to be sharpened, that'll go by, and a crayon that can be really pressed harder. So even in the technology of the difference between the color pencil and the crayon, which needs a different pressure, they will change the way they express and what they draw. So we are constantly, and so I find technology fascinating to a point where I have to hold myself back. You know, otherwise I'd go and work for Wired magazine. You know? Because I really have to hold myself back, because there's a fundamental way that I, as a creative person, I have an overview power over technology, because all the time it's not giving me exactly what I need. On the other hand, if I delve deep into it, I get involved with it, and then I start to accept technology, the power over me, and therefore then I get obsessed with that. And then that's dangerous. That's dangerous. But I'm a boy, you know. I'm a boy with toys.
Do you seek, or do you actively seek transcendence with your films, through your films, or you're not really such aware of that?
Yeah, I think seeking transcendence comes from keeping yourself in a state of least arrogance and in a state of great humility. Elizabeth, I don't know how many of you have seen Elizabeth. The end of it could mean 10 things. To me, it meant, what did that mask, the white mask, mean? It could mean that meant that I am now forever the Queen of England and no longer emotional. To me, it meant this whole idea of, in Hinduism also, there's this whole idea of being able to transcend attachment. Could mean anything. So to me, transcendence lies in the idea that what you say and what you do or what you aspire to has potentially different meanings. And the more meanings it could come up with for different people, the more you've transcended the plot. So you have to transcend the plot. Yeah? That's in storytelling, that's really what it means, is transcending the plot. Yes.
Were you ever kept from your storytelling, like in your film the Bandit Green? Maybe it's about a taboo in India and its favored women. So was there any sort of a resistance and I know people wanting to stop you making the film?
Well, yeah. People didn't really expect the film. They wouldn't let me meet her because I was already a filmmaker, so I never met her till I finished the film. But the writer was in prison with her for almost a year, writing down what she was saying. It's an interesting incident. So in Bandit Queen, if those of you remember it, seen it, there's a point where she's paraded naked in the village square. And I didn't tell my crew I was going to shoot it, only me and my DP knew that. And initially I put on these great big white cloths, what do you call them? Kanat? What's the name for it? It's like,
No, the white cloth.
the cloths, you know, when you have a party, you just cover the party with cloth. What's it called? It's colored cloth.
Poly or something.
Yeah, whatever. I'd covered the whole thing and I was going to shoot the thing, and then I said to my crew, take them off and expose the village, expose it. And I went to the villagers and said, I'm going to shoot something, I can't tell you what it is, but you need to send the women and children inside, don't let them come out. And my crew disappeared when they realized what I was going to do, because they thought we'd get killed, because it was a Brahmin village, which is a very high caste village, and there was this a low caste girl representing who was going to be paraded, and I shot a girl being paraded naked. I just shot it. And because, why did I do that? Because I realized that I could not tell the story if I did not make the distinction between nakedness and nudity. Nakedness is what happened to her. Nudity is a cinematic tool of voyeurism, which is what, when you open a magazine, what you're seeing is the art of nudity. You're not seeing nakedness. But this was not the art of nudity. And that was one thing I was very conscious of in making this film, because it was essentially what is rape is humiliation, and when sex becomes humiliation, what does it mean? And so it has to be to do with it being nakedness, you know. So I just made it naked, completely naked. And of course, all my crew ran off. So your question is, was there resistance? Was there resistance from my crew and the producers and all? They all took off. They took a flight and went out because they thought, this guy's going to get killed. Why should I? At the end of it, it was just me and my DP left there shooting the scene. After that, I went to apologize to the villagers, and they said, "It's all right, sir. Just the same thing happened 2 months ago in a village down that side." So, yeah, the resistance often is from yourself. It's your own fear that forms the resistance before anybody else. So there's a sense of fearlessness. Fearlessness is a huge tool. All people who try and resist you assume that you have fear in you. And they're very afraid if they see fearlessness, because fearlessness is not something that people can normally, the society cannot comprehend fearlessness. Every society assumes that the way we control people is this lurking fear inside them, and will use them.
So, how did you handle the harsh reaction after the film was released? Because in social media terms, we would call it a shitstorm, I guess.
The reaction was from the government and from the censors and the people in power. But the reaction from the people itself, they were coming to see the film in hordes. And then, of course, even from within the movie business, they all said, no, they're only coming because there's a naked girl on screen. So I don't know why I did it. I suppose I just got angry when they said that. So I called the distributor and I said, okay, let's do women-only screenings. So it was the first time in India we started to do women-only screenings, and there was thousands of women came with the women-only screenings. So it was obviously not just to see a naked woman on screen. So I just wanted to prove a point in that. So yeah, that was kind of reaction. I had a big problem. I had to go to the Supreme Court ultimately to get it passed. Yes.
How closely do you work with the writers, like when you're going to direct a film?
Well,
do you just get the script?
Yeah, I like to work very closely with writers, because otherwise it just takes too much time, because I want to see every door that I've opened. Because the process of writing is you open a door and you don't find something, so you come back and open another door. Then you don't find anything there, then you open another door. And I'd like to be there, otherwise I have to, what will happen is when I get the script, I'll open every door myself and say, well, could it be this way or could it have been that way? That's how you you go for it. So I'd rather be there when that process happens, and when we even though the words might be the writers, the doors are common. So I'd like to open the doors together and open even more doors together and let what is found on the other side the writer will interpret, but at least I've been through those doors. Yeah, yes.
I have a question. It's about when you start creating a movie that is based on some events that actually happened or that was historical or written otherwise. It's what I always find interesting when I read books like this, and then I read what the critics or everybody else who read it thought, and I really find myself thinking, no, that meant something else. How do you deal with it? Do you always take that your reading is the right one, or do you talk to other people, read other stuff? I don't know, making a little bit.
Okay, you could do an experiment when this is finished. Talk to your friend and say, what did he say? Both of you are going to have, within a minute of me finishing, different interpretations of what was said or what was discussed. All history is interpretation. Was Alexander the Great born? Yes. What did he say? It's an interpretation. How did he feel is an interpretation. It's only the very broad events that are actual. So I've never imagined that history has a fact, because somebody's written it, therefore it becomes fact. So I'll give you an example. I was asked this when I did the last Elizabeth from the Golden Age. Elizabeth at one point when the Spanish Armada was coming sat on a horse and gave a big speech. And my speech was a little different from what is recorded historically, is recorded in textbooks. This is what Elizabeth said. So there was there were hundreds of people in the press, and they were all going at me, and I said, okay, all right, let's do it. Yeah. No, it's not that. I said, okay, here's this happened at a place called Tilbury where the wind is very strong, and the horse is very frisky. And you're talking to 3,000 people, and Elizabeth nobody ever said that she had a great big booming voice. Said, think about it. Get onto a horse that's really frisky in a strong headwind and try and talk to 3,000 people. How many people actually heard what she said? There were no microphones. There was no loudspeakers. There's no thing that there was a big bullhorn or something that she spoke through. Nothing. So who heard what she said? 5 people? 6 people? Not 3,000. But so it was like, it's like saying, she says, my people, and somebody's, my people, my people. She's talking about my people now. People. Every word must have, by the time it gets down to the back, every word must be changed. So my guess is she went back into her tent and said, right, this is what I said. So it's just a sheer logic, and every film has this. Every film has people speaking at the top of their voices to a large number of troops. Next time you see it, ask yourself, how did they ever hear them? They could not. So it's an interpretation. Everything is interpreted. Everything. Every event, post the event, it's all interpretation. Yes.
What were your inspiration, or who inspired you to? What was the person you thought, okay, I want to be a director because of that person?
I think art is questioning.
Yes.
That's what it is. You want to resolve questions that arise in your mind. And the discipline that you choose is the tools that you choose to how you're going to resolve those questions, or at least ask them. Coming from India, the cinema seemed to be a good way to do it because everybody's obsessed with cinema. So you fall into that particular discipline. If you I could have been a novelist or a photographer or a mathematician trying to resolve and find the one equation that would resolve all other equations. Could have been that. I never got to it, but tried all my life. So I just fell into it. I used to be an accountant in England, like a chartered accountant. It's a chosen profession for a middle-class boy from India. But I just fell into it because I got obsessed with the idea of the audiovisual image. But the reason why you become it is much more fundamental than the tools that you choose. And the fundamental reason is the questions. All storytelling is born out of our desire to understand that which is infinite that lies around us from a finite point of view. I mean, that's the thing. Everything that I look around myself seems to be measurable. That's what we're taught. Everything has length, breadth, and everything exists because it's something. It's not something till it can be measured. And then everybody says that the space goes on forever. So how do we exist in that which can go on forever, and yet anything that exists is that much? So, oh, that's 20 billion light years away. It still exists because we say it's 20 billion light years away. How come I never pick up the newspaper and say there's something that is forever away? So what is that which is forever away? Because the space goes on forever, then there must be something that is forever away. How do you explain forever away? And how do you measure that? So those very fundamental questions were constantly, since I was 10 or 12 years old, were bursting in my mind all the time. And it's probably because I didn't understand physics. So you see, my inability to understand mathematics and physics and the science of preciseness led to me to wanting to explore it through the artistic form. So it's whichever way my mind went. Phew. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Who are your heroes or your mentors in real life or in fictional life?
Tough. It's tough because we assume that we have to have mentors. There are works that I've been fascinated by. It's not that easy to say. I've been obsessed with Japanese cinema since I was a kid because it has a lot of mythology to it. I think that I get very attracted to the ideas of myth and how they translate into our lives. So any filmmaker that delves into myth, and the Japanese filmmakers have always done that. So I can't pick up one hero. I can pick works. I mean, the whole of Elizabeth was conceived around one piece of music, and I used that piece of music, which was Mozart's Requiem. Now, apparently, it was written when Mozart was dying. It was a death chant. But why did I think about it for Elizabeth? I don't know. In fact, I used it to shoot the film. It followed the rhythms of the Requiem. But I still don't know why. And finally, when I gave it to my composer, he said, I can't better this piece of music, you shot it. So he just recorded the Requiem. And it's there. I don't know. I don't, and it's not a question that you should ask. I mean, it's a question to ask, but it's not a good question to answer. Because otherwise you'll make yourself far more finite than you actually were. You know, you stop exploring a much larger aspect of yourself. You say, oh, that person. Yeah.
You're afraid of death?
Am I afraid of death? Yeah, who isn't? But it's interesting. Mortality and death are two different things. The mortality is a cessation of life as we know it now. Death is a much larger aspect. If you talk about death, then you say, because everything that I perceive now will cease. Well, I don't know that. That my perception will change, I do know that. But all our ideas about post-death and immortality and reincarnation are based on the idea that somehow our perceptions will go on after perception changes. The death of the ego dies with the mind dies, and therefore but the assumption that the mind will continue to be in some form is to me the egoistic assumption. So yeah, I'm afraid of mortality. We all are. I'm less and less afraid of death because I'm consistently asking myself about if I'm to be afraid of that, how come I'm not afraid of where I came from? So why am I not afraid of birth? Why am I not asking that question? Right? So death is a conceptual, perceptive idea that constantly invades my mind and invades every act of creativity that I do. It does with a lot of artists. But mortality, yeah, because that's your ego and your instinct fighting back and saying, no, I don't want to seize this opportunity. Yeah. Yes.
I'm from Nigeria, and there's a pretty big film industry there. I forget what your perception was on these emerging, like Africa's emerging film industry, and whether they need to start competing on an international level to progress, or if they can.
Well, Nigeria's film industry started in a very interesting way. It didn't start on film, it started on video cameras, right? It's the first, probably the only film industry I know in the world that actually started on digital.
Yes.
There's no reason for it to compete, because competition is also an aspiration to be like somebody else. And Africa has a lot more stories to tell, like India does, like China did. And the worst thing that can happen to African cinema is that they start to aspire to tell stories in a form that is far more understandable to a different culture, instead of using their own culture and their own myths, which is what your culture is based on, using your own myths to explore your own myths in the audiovisual form, in the cinematic form. So I think that it needs to have the confidence and the wonder of its own before it aspires to go international. And it's much more for the audiences internationally to explore it, to see what lies in different kinds of different forms of storytelling. And in those films that are African films, I saw a film, I was in the jury here 2 years ago, and I saw a film from Chad called The Screaming Man, which is a completely different way of telling a story. It was so deeply moving, because there were assumptions of cultural happenings that were strung together that gave you a different perspective of life. So, for example, you'd normally have a story that is told if somebody dies, is followed by a funeral, and is followed by grief. What if it's just followed by absolute acceptance? You're suddenly told about death in a certain completely different way. And The Screaming Man was like that. Death was followed immediately by acceptance. And so it made you suddenly think of death in a different way that belonged to a different culture. Now that was from Chad. It was an amazing film. So I think that yeah, Nigerian cinema needs its own opportunity to tell its own stories. Yes?
I would like to ask you about how you feel about advertising. If you think there is room for you to do something there, beyond maybe the 30 seconds spot, if there are projects that you might be interested in, if there is room for you to do something there, how you feel about it?
I think advertising goes far beyond the 30-second spot. Even in the 30-second spot, there's a lot of research that goes into it, and is trying to find aspects of mythology and provocation points that exist beyond the 30-second spot. I'm trying not to talk about this, I won't, but I will. I recently in social media did a little campaign on Twitter called Ads We Don't Buy. And it suddenly became the trending topic. It became so huge within an hour that it was out of control. And Twitter has this thing that after 24 hours they'll shut off a hashtag. And the hashtag Ads We Don't Buy went off, and there was so much information. 4 million people gave you information about how they thought of skin whitening cream, for example, what they thought of trans fats in ads and sold to kids. So I think that advertising has the potential, because of the kind of minds that exist in advertising, the creativity that exists in advertising, to create great social change. And it can and will and should, and a lot of people do that. It also has a certain idea behind it that is of complete exploitation, and that is dangerous at times, and we should be careful of that. But I think that the advertising professional now is becoming more and more a person of culpability and understands his or her responsibility. And as we're going that way, I notice more coming out of the advertising professional, where they're using the particular talents they have, which are huge in the way that they understand how to take mythology and manipulate it, and they're using it more and more towards social gain while selling somebody's product. So what's happening is that down the line, the product is becoming more responsible. Because the relationship between the client and the advertising company is a continuously constant one where they constantly talk to each other. And social media is affecting that. In social media, there was a time when you were talking to an individual and all advertising was provoked to the individual. But what you're getting now is a very fast collective response, right? I mean, in film business, it's a very simplistic example I'm giving you, but Hollywood used to think, okay, so if we take huge stars, we'll get a great weekend. It doesn't happen anymore. After the first show, people get onto social media and your film is made or destroyed after the first show, because the sheer communication part of the collective has ensured that the individual response has turned into a collective response. And therefore, the advertising professional too is looking at a collective response and understanding that the collective response has a particular, it's a tool for social change. And so advertising is changing. So I'm quite fascinated by what's happening to the 30-second commercial.
And would you like to be involved?
I've made commercials. Yeah, well, yes, I'd like to be involved more in advertising. It's quite an art, telling a story in 30 seconds. It's a huge art. We as filmmakers, we have this 2 hours to tell a story. We get quite lazy sometimes, you know. Huge pauses and things. 30 seconds to tell a story and make it last in somebody's mind is another art. It's another art. But it's a very, very precise art. It's very interesting. Yes?
And what about acting? You've been working as an actor, so how do you like this experience?
I was never good. I was quite an ordinary actor, but I like acting. I like it because I can get in front of the camera, and then what I do is not my responsibility. It's somebody else's. I enjoy acting, yes, and I'll do it. I'm shy of it. Much as I work with actors all the time, I'm camera shy. If I'm talking to an actor, you suddenly turn the camera around, look at me, I'll freeze. So I'm not a natural actor. I have acted. I'm not a natural actor. I need a director like myself to break me out of my shyness.
How did you get the offer?
Sorry?
How did you get the offer to act?
Hang around. That's how I started as an actor in the movie business, from an accountant to an actor to a director. Yeah, there might be 20 actors in one film. There's only one director, so it's easier to get an acting job. And you just hang around, smiling at everybody. You get a job. You know, somebody's going to take pity on you and say, "Oh no, put this guy in." You know, all right, he's been hanging around a long time. So I just hung around. That's all I did. Just hung around. And then you try and have a girlfriend who's in the business. You choose your girlfriend carefully.
How do you feel about films or short films that are shared for free online? Do you think the film industry will end up that way someday?
This idea of monetization is becoming such an obsessive word in the whole idea. How do you monetize? How do you monetize? My idea about that is, how did you monetize when stories were first being told? When a grandmother was telling her story to her grandkids, how did you monetize it? But that's where filmmaking comes, right? So we're starting it all over again. Some of the best films that I'm seeing today are not on screen. They're when I scar and somebody sends you a video and I look at it and I said, oh my God, that's amazing. Because somebody has had to make something out of nothing. And when you make something out of nothing, your creative juices are flowing so hard. And then you put it out there, and I'm sure. And so people are getting something for nothing for so long that to turn it into monetization will be, there's enough capitalism in the world to find a way. So we're going back to a creative source, and capitalism will find a way to monetize it. I'm not worried about that. Everybody, the obsession with the idea of monetization is actually it is from those that have risen to the big structures in Hollywood. It's their way of fighting back and saying, well, you can't monetize that. But it's happening anyway, whether you monetize it or not. It's becoming the primary source of audiovisual.
I'm very conscious of Shekhar's time because I know he's very time poor. So this is one more question.
Anybody? Okay. Yes.
So how do you, like when we were speaking about responses and how now you have a lot of collective response that comes back to you. So how do you handle that? Like how do you handle criticism or appreciation or like probably if a fan is messaging in the morning about something that you saw? So how do you handle that?
Yeah, you have to keep your ego in control. It's really essential because it can be. I've known friends of mine who shut off Twitter because people started to abuse them. One thing, people respond to the provocation points you use. I never get abused. Or maybe 1 in 5,000 will be an abusive tweet. That's because I don't abuse. People respond to the way you're provoking people. But criticize, yes. I have a friend who's just been caught in a big Wall Street scandal. His name is Rajat Gupta. I don't know whether he was in school with me. And when I went out to support him on Twitter, you have no idea how many people came back and said, oh, just because he's a friend, you talk about all these politicians who do this. Now this is your friend and therefore you're supporting him. I have to take it. Or I have to argue my case. So then I write on my blog and I tweet my blog and then people come back and say, we believe you, we don't believe you. So you have to understand that you're part of the community, you're not outside the community. And inside the community, it's like if you don't make yourself, agree to make yourself vulnerable, then you can't. You can't actually be part of a community where you're understanding the community. You can't be outside the community and say, all I want to hear is good things about myself and I'll understand how it goes. You won't.
So then do you adapt those criticisms if it is for your work or something like that?
Yeah, you've got to listen to it. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. All right.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob.
It was brilliant.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Hope we see you.
Yeah, I'm around here.
Okay, good.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank
Thank you very
so
much.
much again.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.